Hello, everyone. My name is McKinney, and I am excited to invite you all to join us today for the DC Superhero Reads for your TBR pile or list or dome or however it is that you stack the books you have yet to read, because we all are there. The struggle is real, especially right now. Um, so, like I said, I'm McKinney. You can call me L. Either one doesn't matter, first or second. Pick your favorite. It's all okay. And I will let our esteemed guests introduce themselves. Take it away, Marieke.
Okay, hi, I'm Marieke Nijkamp. I'm the author of The Oracle Code, which was illustrated by Manuel Pritano. It's a book about Barbara Gordon as Oracle, teen Barbara Gordon as Oracle. And it's basically her becoming disabled, adjusting to life in a wheelchair, and having to solve the disappearance of the kids around her while she's staying in the rehabilitation center. And it's a story I am ridiculously proud of. So one that I hope, if you haven't read it yet, you'll pick it up. The art is fantastic. The colors are by Jordi Belair, lettering by Clayton Cowles. And yeah, that's it. My pronouns are whatever you want them to be. I don't necessarily care because I have a very gendered native language. So I have a very complicated relationship with pronouns to begin with. But yeah, I'm non-binary, queer, disabled, all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much. And I haven't gotten a chance to read Oracle Code yet. I haven't gotten a chance to read much anything, honestly, in like the last, since 2020 began.
Yeah,
So,
fair.
yeah,
I will trade you a copy for Nubia because I want to read
we're
that
almost done.
so
We're almost
badly.
done. We're almost done. We're in the middle of lettering right now. It's fun times.
Isn't it the best?
Alex.
All right. Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you all. And my name is Alex Sanchez, and I'm the author of You Brought Me the Ocean, which
Ooh.
is a superhero origin story unlike any you've ever imagined, in that it's also a coming out story and a sweet, steamy romance as well. And pronouns say he, him, his, and yeah, great. I look forward to talking more about it.
Yes, 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 yes. So excited. I'm not going to introduce myself again, but I will add that my pronouns are she and her. And as it has been discussed, because I didn't say so, I am the author of Nubia Real One, art by Robin Smith, colors by Bree Henderson, and that follows Nubia, Wonder Woman's black twin sister, as a teenager. And I have gotten this question a lot. Yes, they are still twin sisters. It all is explained in the book. Speaking of the book, let's talk about the books. So, for both of you, this is sort of your first foray in not only, comics and superheroes, but graphic novels in general. And there were like other mediums and art forms for your storytelling prior to this. Can we sort of, for you, how is it different working on this versus working on your other work? And we'll start with Alex this time.
Sure. So, first of all, I meant to mention, of course, that I worked with an amazing illustrator for You Brought Me the Ocean, and that's Julie Moreau. And so, in terms of what was different, was so many things. First of all, I've always been a standard prose writer. And so I never didn't even realize that you write a graphic novel through a script that's similar to a movie script. So that was a big change. And that along with that then comes, actually having control of what it's going to look like on the page. With a standard prose novel, I never know, well, when is the page turn going to occur? And so with a graphic novel, just being very aware of how it's going to be laid out on the page and learning that, that bottom right panel, always to put a hook in there that then leads on to either the next page or turning the page. So focusing on that. And then what else was different was not having worked with an artist. Usually I have a sort of vague idea of what the character looks like in my head, but then to actually have the artist, bring the character through life visually was just so exciting. And at first it was like this sort of like, well, that's not exactly how I thought they would look like, but yeah, I like that. And all of a sudden they're coming to life, and just loving all of Jules' work in that sense. So those were a lot of differences. I read a lot of graphic novels, read a lot of comics as I was learning how to do this, and noticing that, when they really came alive for me was when they weren't just two talking heads exchanging dialogue, when they were doing something. So, giving the artist, Jewel in this case, so much to work with in terms of what are the characters doing, even if it's just, pouring a glass of orange juice or pointing at something that then she could make the art more dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely the same for me. It was one of the things I loved most was figuring out not so much like the talking heads, but the specific beats of action that needed to happen in all the various panels. And also figuring out that even two different types of action won't be able to be represented in one panel because it's a single shot. Like you can't have movement or anything like that. So that was one of the things I love most, is just like trying to figure out what the right snapshot should be for all of these various moments in the story. And I love working with artists so much. I am not very visually inclined. I'm quite face blind. I have a terrible memory for faces. I really hate descriptions beyond like, oh man. I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember words. I am recovering from COVID, so occasionally words are really hard.
I mean, words are hard even before COVID, so I am super impressed right now.
I mean, I am 3
like
months into
mess.
recovery, so it's sort of fine. But occasionally I just have these moments where I'm like, yeah, words are my trade. What are words exactly? But yeah, like I love writing scripts where I can focus on things like emotion and the mood of a certain scene, and like evoking all these shadows in the corner, and things like the Oracle Code takes place in this really creepy Arkham Center for Independence, and it's called Arkham, so it's pretty f***ed up. And like that's what's going to happen. So it was really fun to play with those aspects. Like, this is what I think it should feel like. And Manuel I didn't have that moment of, oh, this isn't quite what I imagined. I, like 5 pages in, was entirely convinced Manuel could just like stare right into my brain, because it felt like he completely got it and just took what I offered in terms of script and made it so much better.
Yeah, a good artist is worth a few times their weight in gold when it comes to this, because they do the heavy lifting, right? And I absolutely understand what you meant about, trying to make sure that it ends on the right page, the right panel, Alex. I can, you two will understand my struggle here, is that I kept putting the start of a spread on the wrong page. So I had to go back and add a page or take away a page. It's so different because I also started with prose writing. So it's so different from that. And I think it has helped me as a prose writer, because you have to condense. What drew you to, because I know you kind of touched on it, Alex, what drew you to doing a graphic novel versus doing another prose novel? And in particular, doing it for the character that you're highlighting, be it Oracle or Aqualad, because I know, Alex, you said that you had read graphic novels and comics in sort of preparation for this. Had either of you sort of dipped your toes into this art form or this storytelling form before? Marieke?
I'd never done it before. I read comics growing up, many of them, mostly specifically European ones, which I came to superhero comics quite late because they weren't translated into Dutch so much. And European comics are weirdly historical, lots of focus on Roman times. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but like that's definitely the thing that happened in Belgian and French comics. But like I love comics growing up. They were a huge part of forming me as a very geeky person. And then DC at some point just approached my agent and was like, is Marieke interested in writing a graphic novel? And I was like, I would pay you money to do that, so yes. And they specifically asked me if I wanted to write Barbara Gordon as Oracle, which to me was a complete no-brainer because I was a disabled teen who spent most of my life, most of my social life on the internet because I, for the longest time, was unable to do much out of bed. I needed to rest a lot. I had a lot of pain. So I could really connect to this superhero behind the scenes who is in a wheelchair, who uses the computer to basically rule the world, and who's still complete badass, and none of those things take away from each other. So knowing that that was an opportunity for me to go back to a character who I just saw myself in to an obscene degree was yeah, I didn't even need to think about that. I was like, yes, I want to do this. I want to take this character and write a love story to every single disabled teen out there, basically.
Yeah, and for me, it's, you know, when I got the email from DC, I was like, "Are you kidding? Is this a joke?" It's like, sure. They're like, "Would you like to collaborate with it?" I'm like, "Yeah." And it was so exciting. You know, here's this, you know, home of these worldwide icons that it was like, absolutely. And when they proposed the character Aqualad, who I quite frankly, honestly, didn't know very much about, I'd heard the name perhaps, but that was about it. And, you know, they explained that he identified as gay in a previous version, but they wanted to really go into depth into the story. And one of the things I loved that appealed to me, you know, what attracted me to doing this was that they were very emphatic that they really wanted to focus on the emotional core of the story. And, you know, as a fiction writer, that's it. You know, emotion, that's what's at the core of fiction. So I was very excited about that. And they're like, you know, we give you freedom. You can pick and choose aspects from, you know, previous versions of the character. We really want to make this your own. We really want you to make this your own. So that was all thrilling. And then as I got to know about Aqualad, that, you know, he is this character superhero who has these powers over water and the ocean. And for me as a teenager, when I was struggling with my sexuality, my sexual orientation, being romantically attracted to boys as well as girls, and so much confusion about that, for me, the ocean was my refuge. That's where I went. No one picked on me or bullied me there. No one judged me in the ocean. So to write about this character who that's his whole thing, is wanting to be at the ocean, and hence the title, You Brought Me the Ocean. And that aspect of it. And then, you know, for queer people, the whole idea of the metaphor, you know, that historically, you know, queer people, we can identify with superheroes having their secret identity that they don't let other people know, having that double life where, you know, we know who we really are, but then we have to present to the world this other image. So that metaphor just was so strong. It's like, oh, I loved it. I loved putting this story together. And you know, with, you know, and to do it collaboratively with this team of Julie, and then our wonderful editor Sarah Miller, that you know, usually writing a prose novel is such a lonely experience. It's just, you know, me and the page, and to be able to, you know, creatively be feeding off of each other's ideas was just so stimulating.
I once again absolutely agree with you all on seeing yourself in these particular characters. That's one of the reasons I was drawn to Nubia, who, you know, is DC's first Black woman superhero, and depending on who you ask, is the first Black woman superhero, point blank, period. So there's a lot of history there, and I think it's really important, this whole this turning point that we seem to be seeing with regards to representation, just in media in general, but particularly in books and now in graphic novels and comics, because comics is, you know, they've kind of been behind sometimes. Like they'll kind of jump ahead and then they'll stay at that ahead point until the rest of the world just sort of passes them up, which is kind of weird. Like,
Yep.
you were ahead of the game there and then you just stopped. But each of these books does touch on representation. Okay, not touch on representation. We're like drowning in representation. It's a beautiful thing. And
We're like hitting people over the head with it.
Yes.
That's how it should be.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of piggyback on that. Did you approach, how did you approach, you know, the stories and reimagining these characters? Not only putting pieces of yourselves into them, but what you potentially wanted readers to see in them that we hadn't seen, you know, in whatever iteration of a representation before. Because yes, there has been, you know, queer representation in comics, and yes, there has been some disability representation, and yes, there has been some racial representation, but you kind of push it a little bit further with each of these. Alex, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, that's you know, part of what was so exciting is that DC, you know, is being so embracing of diversity and inclusion. And for me, it's not so much that we're being flooded with it now, rather that we're noticing how absent it was in the past. And I think that's what makes it so striking now, when we just. So for me, it was sort of like. In all of my writing, part of what's happened is, you know, I'm an immigrant from Mexico, so I was very aware growing up of, you know, not seeing images of people like me, and then when I did see them, how validating that was. You know, we talk in YA circles about how, you know, how books can be mirrors and windows, but to have that mirror for me, and then when I started being published with my own works, then hearing from young people not only how important it was for them to be, you know, reading about other queer people, but then also that, you know, I made my characters, you know, especially in Rainbow Boys, that one of them was Latino, and hearing from so many Latinx young people about how important that was for them and how validating and empowering. So it was just, for me as a writer, I got to do more of this. I got to be more inclusive in my own writing. So it's something that I've been, you know, putting into practice, you know, actually doing in my books. And what I loved about this experience now with You Brought Me the Ocean is that I could have these characters be of different ethnicities and you know, so-called race, and at the same time that I don't need to be making a big deal out of it, because we're seeing it visually. It's like it's right there. And so we don't have to, you know, oftentimes in prose we have to figure out, how can I say this without, you know, making it an issue? And in a graphic novel, it's like, you got it right there. Just do it visually, and it's there. And I think it's so much more powerful in a graphic novel because you are seeing it visually, and you are seeing people coming from different heritage backgrounds that they're connecting. And so much of my writing has been about community building and showing how young people can connect despite their differences, and oftentimes because of their differences. And to be able to put that into a graphic novel is just like so exhilarating for me.
Yeah, I mean, 100% that. Like, one of the things I really wanted to do with Oracle, and Alex, you touched on mirrors and windows. Let me just, if you haven't read Radine Sims Bishop's fantastic Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors, please do so. Because that's where the original phrase came from, and she's fantastic. So tip. But yeah, what I wanted to do is when I had the chance to write this book is just make a book about disability and celebrate all aspects of disability. So in case you don't know, Oracle Code is, like I said, about Barbara just after she becomes, it happens in the first couple of pages. She gets shot and ends up in a wheelchair. And she goes to a rehabilitation center to figure out life in a wheelchair, to figure out how to use a wheelchair, to sort of rediscover who she is, because she spends certainly the first half of the book just angry at the world and angry at everyone, and lost and trying to figure out everything again, because suddenly all her plans seem to have crumbled, and she just doesn't know what to do. Everyone around her tells her that, well, we'll find a way to fix you, which is a super problematic idea to begin with, but she just wants to be who she is. And what I wanted to do with that, on the one hand, is just I wanted to show that journey, because I don't think it's often shown in the way we approached it, which is by allowing a disabled character to be angry and hurting, and to have all those like negative emotions, because oftentimes, and I think that holds true for all marginalized characters, they have to be they're held to higher standards than non-marginalized characters, and ideally that means being as perfect as possible. And Babs isn't perfect throughout most of the book, and she needs her friends around her to get back to herself. She needs that mystery to sort of find herself again, get in touch with like her own curiosity and her drive to solve problems and solve puzzles. And I really wanted to show that imperfect side of her too, and tell disabled teens like, hey, and especially teens who acquire disability and who learn to live with it, like, it's okay to go through that journey. It's okay to feel all of those things. It's okay to struggle at times, because it isn't easy and it doesn't have to be, but it is important to stay close to yourself, stay true to who you are, and listen to the people around you. And being able to do so in a context where, with one exception, literally every single teen in the book is disabled, was like, that's not something I have ever seen in books before. And to be able to not just show that, but to show that disability can take many forms, and that, dear God, disability representation shouldn't just be white, because too often it is. Like, Babs's best friends are Korean American and Black, and one of them uses crutches, the other one is in a wheelchair. And there are people around her with all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of disabilities. And it was just, for me, so heartening to see that this is the community that I know and that I, for a time, grew up in, because I spent a year in the rehabilitation center as well when I was a teen. And this is what I hope people see when they think about disabled people, which isn't people to pity, which isn't just white people in wheelchairs, but this whole range of experiences and this whole range of people.
I have a couple of questions for each of you specific to your books, and we'll start with Oracle Code, because you touched on pretty much every question I was going to ask, so I'll do like a two-part.
Sorry.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect flow for the conversation. I love it. So you talked about how people in the book want to fix Barbara, and how that is a very problematic viewpoint that's had in, I mean, pretty much all media when it comes to let's just not, we're not going to lie about it. Let's just be honest. And then there's also the other side of that ridiculous sword when it comes to superheroes, is where you have the trope of, oh, this person is now disabled, but then a superpower kicks in and they're technically not anymore. Or like Daredevil with losing his sight, but now he does. So
I have feelings about that.
Oh man. Thank you for all of the allegories, superheroes. Mm-hmm. We're gonna take it from here. But just sort of, turning that on its head and shoving it off a cliff, honestly, and building your own, your counter argument to why this is okay. Can you talk about, that, and how that led to Barbara being her own hero and her own person in this book, because normally, you know, Oracle is like part of a team, and it's the focus isn't entirely on her, but in this book, she is the star. And she does all of those things to dismantle everything that I was talking about. Can you talk about what it was, what drove that, and what it was like being able to see that come to life as the art came in and as the story came together?
I think those are two sides of the same coin. What it was like to see that come to life was super emotional. There were definitely pages that Manuel sent in inks where I just like saw them and literally started crying because I'd never seen that much disability representation before. And then I shared it with like, probably shouldn't tell this online. I shared it with disabled friends. It's like, look, it's us. And just being able to have that conversation and be like, sometimes it was like the simplest stuff. There is a panel on one of the pages where Barbara transfers from her wheelchair onto a bench. And I can't remember having seen something as simple as that, transferring from a wheelchair onto another, like in another sitting position. I've never seen that in media ever. So like being able to play with that and share it with people whom I know it would mean a lot to as well was just such an emotional high. And what drove that was a whole lot of anger. Anger is a really good motivation for writing books. It's maybe not always the healthiest one, but it is exactly what you said. Like, so much media tells us that we're only worthy when we're fixed, or we're only worthy when we're dead. And I wanted to take this book and show like disabled teens primarily, but also like people from my generation and older, that we're very valid and we're allowed to be the heroes. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it now.
Go right ahead.
But yeah, it was just that sense of we're going to fix this together. And if you need someone who says to you, I see you, I hope this book is it. I hope this book tells readers, you're okay, you're perfect the way you are. I see you, I appreciate you, I love you. You get to be a hero.
Okay,
So that's that's it.
Okay.
I'm just okay.
I mean, it's beautiful, honestly, and I can. Okay, all right. Pulling in my emotions now as well. It's sort of the same thing in Aqualad, because you have this story, because you talked about it earlier, Alex, where, you know, the metaphor of having the secret identity and having to hide yourself as a queer person. And there's this interesting thing that happens in the book, with one of the characters where, you know, there's a support system of, you know, just in life, but then the superhero side is the side that's kind of like, we're not really good with that. So what was it like using that metaphor? Because I mean, you both just like flip these metaphors on their heads in these great imaginative ways, and I'm so excited about it. And also, you were talking about like your own, how you went to the ocean, like that was your place of refuge. Did that have to do with, you know, choosing the setting for In Truth or Consequences in Mexico, which I feel just that question alone could fill an hour, in my opinion, with, you know. So just sort of the same kind of question that I posed about Oracle, but on the side of, you know, the representation and the problems that we've seen with superhero representation regarding queerness, and how you've taken that and just sort of turned it and made it your own, and what drove those decisions as well, particularly about the direct metaphor with the being, you know, hiding being a superhero, and now that's a problem with people knowing it.
Yeah, so I think similar to what Marieke said about, you know, so much of Oracle being about empowerment. And, you know, in the same way, it's like my book, it's about empowerment. It's about, you know, really pushing that metaphor in my case, where the idea that when we can fully be who we are as integrated human beings, realize that there's never been anyone else exactly like us, and there never will be again in this universe. And so what is it that we can most contribute to make the world a better place is us, fully who we are. And that, that is our superpower. So for Jake to come to this realization that, by embracing all of who he is, it's the big deal isn't that, he can control water. That the big deal is that he's being true to who he is. He's being who he was meant to be by becoming fully himself. And so for me, going back to my story, uh, as a young person, that's where I wasn't there yet. I was trying to sort out and trying to accept who I was, and not having the community, not having the support, being living in fear, so scared of, would people reject me? Would they harass me? Would I be bullied? Because as queer people, we face this very real supervillain, which is homophobia and transphobia. And so, for a young person to understand that what's most important is that they love and accept and embrace themselves, and that coming out can be, a gradual process. But what's most important for them is to be true to who we are. That's their superpower. That's what they have to contribute to this world. So like Jake, all his angst about, I want to be part of something bigger than myself. I want to make a difference in the world. That's the way in which, I think our stories are universal. That old saying that by making them so specific, they become universal. Because, regardless of our gender orientation or sexual orientation or ability, able-bodiedness, it's like we all have these universal desires, to love and be loved, to be accepted, to make a place for a better place, for a better world.
And this is going to be another both question now, because it's sort of been this running theme, how much representation matters, how much it matters in books and movies and TVs. But I want to talk about specifically why it matters in the superhero story, like being able to see yourselves as one of these incredible beings that we all up and away or whatever it was that we saw when we were kids. It's like, I want to do that. What about representation in the side of being one of the superheroes really spoke to you and really connected with you on this project? Because I know for me it was with Nubia, it was this idea that, okay, Wonder Woman or Superman shows up to save the day and in the process destroys the city block. And, they hand the bad guy over and then they go about their day. Same thing happens with Nubia. The cops are trying to slap cuffs on her, because she's seen as a threat. And so being able to see that having this ability and being able to love yourself truly and being able to say, hey, I'm valid as well, was one of the reasons that pulled me to it, was the conflict inherent in how the world views superheroes overall. So was there anything similar that drew you to the story about how you would see yourself, or how you think the superhero community or the community around superheroes would view you and aspects of who you are? And we'll start with Alex.
Sure. Well, for me, it's I think what happens, especially for young people, is they see superheroes as celebrities. So in the same way that a real life celebrity comes out, it's like, wow, they came out. That's a role model for me. And I think for young people, the same thing. Wow, Aqualad, you mean he's gay? He's coming out, and if he can do it, then it becomes a role model for young people. And I think, that's just so important and empowering. And at the same time, going back to the emotional experience, that it's not, something that's easy for him, that he struggles with it. And the reality is that, even though we've had this tremendous cultural shift in terms of LGBTQ people, it's like homophobia persists and transphobia persists. And yet at the same time, there is all this more more visibility and acceptance of queer people. So those are, as a writer, those are wonderful tensions and conflicts to write into a story.
Yeah, I mean, I see the thing is I sort of hesitate to call Oracle a superhero necessarily. And what she does is heroic at times. At times she also struggles with all of that. But her main focus is helping people and listening to the people around her, and she doesn't do a great job of that at first. And it takes a while to get to a point where she's like, oh no, what they're telling me is actually important. And there's this sense of, for me, her heroism lies in finding out who she is, who she can be, against all the odds and against like societal expectations. And I'm not sure if I'd call that a superhero, but she does, like, she saves the day, she saves people. She does so because she creates a community and because everyone brings their own strength to it. And I think for me that's far more interesting than just having like the powers. And ideally, like, especially powers that come with no consequences at all. I think there's, God, that's a whole different discussion about why that's necessarily aspirational. But yeah, no, that's never something that's really appeals to me. Like, why would you? I mean, I know why, because white men, but powers and no consequences. I'm not sure the world actually is a whole lot better that way. I think it's important to look at the consequence, to look at the humanity, to look at your own, what you bring to the table, why it matters so much to you, why those struggles matter as much as the victories do, because you can't have one without the other. And I think that's far more important than the whole idea of superhero. But I also recognize that at the same point, if we keep having these discussions about representation, and at the same time we, like, on the one hand and on the other hand, we have these superheroes that are this kind of this idea of look, it's important to talk about all of us and it's important to see all of us represented, but our superheroes are going to be like white, cishet, non-disabled. That says a lot about aspirations and what we think of as acceptable representation versus this is something we should actually aspire to. So I think it is an important conversation to have, but I think part of that is also why I'm so uncomfortable with the idea of superheroes as a term, because it is so rarely used. Like in my own experience, in like this, in the case of disabled heroes, there's always a but, there's always a like an asterisk, there's always something behind the comma. And instead of wanting to fit in the mold that other people created, let's take that mold and fit it onto our stories.
That is an excellent point, because we do have more and more stories where people are doing, the saving, but they're not from Krypton, or from the Amazonian tribe, or didn't get bitten by a radioactive spider. So there needs to be, I feel the same, like there needs to be a conversation and there need to be additions to the umbrella term, I suppose is what you would call it, that has been carried over from superhero-dom, the golden age, faster than a speeding bullet.
I mean, alternatively, if we can just like keep the term superheroes and like have it be ours for a couple of like decades, I'd be okay with that too. In that case, I'm perfectly fine talking about superheroes.
There you go. There you go. There you go. I want to pull back to craft again, because I hear it in the way that you both talk about your stories and talk about how you built the characters and the world specifically, and we kind of hinted on it a little bit earlier, but what was sort of like the most challenging part of bringing your primarily prose storytelling method to graphic novel, and conversely, what was the most fun part? But you can't say something that you already said before. So the art we can't talk about. We can't talk about the art, and we can't talk about the panels and the spreads being on the wrong page and trying to figure that out. So what's something that was like challenging just from like a craft level, and what was fun from a craft level? And we'll start with you, Marieke.
The fun part was definitely the structure. I am like a very type A personality plotter. So I loved having like layouts and thumbnails and like small bits of story everywhere. Like I had note cards just spread out across the floor, and it made me so happy. This tells you everything about me you ever need to know. Like that made me so happy. And it's something I use in writing too, but it's definitely like that particular approach to story and taking the building blocks and really digging to find until you find like the core elements of every block, and then using that to rebuild the story is something I'm definitely taking away from graphic novels to novels, to prose novels as well, because it taught me so incredibly much. And I think on the flip side, what's hardest? Oh God, that's actually really difficult. I really clicked with this way of writing. It really meshed with the way my brain works, and part of that too is just being a huge comics reader. But part of that too is definitely like structure everywhere. It's so great. But I think I'll say for me, probably one of the hardest parts at times was trying to envision what a certain panel would look like in art, and it was one of the first things I learned to let go, because it's really not my job. And the best thing I think any graphic novelist, like any writer, any comics writer can do is learn to trust the team that you're working with. So unless there were things that I knew, like Chekhov's gun type elements that I knew needed to be in a certain panel, I just try to write the script in as good a way as possible for my illustrator to make sense of it and to hopefully help his process, and then let it go and allow him to take it and run with it. And finding that freedom was actually also turned out to be one of the best parts. I'm sorry, this is kind of, I'm mostly answering your second half of your question.
That is fine.
No, graphic novels are really fun. Everyone should write them. Or art them. I can't art. Art is magic. I have no idea how people seriously, I don't know how they do it, but it's really cool.
Well, I'm a big outliner, so I also love that whole structural part of it. But you know, when I was a boy, I loved to draw, and even though I hadn't drawn regularly for decades, literally, it's like I loved then in this process to try to imagine what would this look like, and even to the point of doing stick figures and things like that for how I would imagine it, just so that then I could put together an idea, a description, a scene, a panel description to give to the artist, and then let Jewel do her magic with it. I agree, it is magic, so let them do their magic with it. But at the same time, I would be reading all these comics and graphic novels, trying to learn how to do this. And then one of the things that really excited me was to see, when an artist, where they would do something from like, bird's eye view on something, or looking up at something. And so I would give Jewel, suggestions for that sort of thing, and then let them do whatever they wanted. So that whole idea of once I start getting into the swing of it, to visualize. And then, there were times when, Sarah, my editor would say, we don't really need dialogue here. They let the image just speak for itself. And it's like, oh gosh, can we do that? And then I started noticing in graphic novels when they would do that and how powerful those moments of not having dialogue, but just having a striking enough image. So that whole process of learning was just so much fun. I think, looking back on it, one of the challenging pieces for me was, knowing like when to condense novel, condense panels, when it's like, okay, so this dialogue could go in here, the whole pacing thing, when to break up the dialogue into different panels, when to break up the actions into different panels, and when they could be condensed into one single panel, whether it was a splash or just one small panel. What could be cut out, because as I said, the actions would speak louder than the words, just the visuals would speak louder. And so Sarah, she's much more experienced. I mean, who knows how many graphic novels she's worked on. So she was able to really guide me through that. And so, I learned so much in the process. That was probably the hardest thing for me, was the pacing and breaking up.
I think just to add to that too, like when you said when you mentioned the panels without words, like that was one of the hardest things, like going back to my novel in progress after writing a graphic novel. I was like, what do you mean I have to write everything?
Yeah.
What are all these words doing here?
I think one of the most challenging parts for me was having to condense, like trying to figure out what I wanted to say, but in fewer words. When I'm used to having all of that real estate, where the character can just ramble and kind of go on, like, the banter could serve no purpose. But in the graphic novel, you could kind of do that, but it was so much less.
Yeah.
So much less. So I think the dialogue, and it did the same for me, is like now, because you had to tell the whole story through the dialogue. Like the pictures do the heavy lifting, but in order to give the artist the idea, like this is, and that was another thing that I had trouble with, was describe the panel. I'm like, I don't know. They're standing in front of a car. What do you want from me?
There's a building, maybe.
Because it's like, give us 2 sentences. I'm like, I don't do. You either get like the paragraph or the intersect.
Yeah.
So trying to, to make it easier for the artist, because I didn't want them to have to be like, what is she talking about? So I think that was one of them. And then, of course, the fun of figuring out, I can trust my team, because it is just you when you're writing the prose book, and you are the one who have to stand behind the words. But having the team was just, it was a godsend. So echoing all of that you said, and we're coming up on our time here. So I've got one last question, which is the quintessential panel question, is what do you want readers to take away from this book? Marieke.
Oh, God. I mean, I think it's mostly what I just said. I hope disabled readers read it and see themselves and know that they're seen, and that there's at least like this story where they get to be the hero, and that thankfully there are more and more stories where they can see that same acknowledgement and that same understanding. And I hope that this can be a breath of fresh air if they need it. I also hope non-disabled readers read it and realize that we're here, we're human, we're valid, we deserve to live life on our own terms and not on the terms of this very ableist, inaccessible world. And I think that's important to see, because so often disabled people and characters in books and media are no more than props. Occasionally they speak, but that's about it. And I honestly do think, like, we talked about Lean Sims Bishop, fantastic essay, mirrors, windows, and glass sliding doors. I think that's so important, like seeing yourself reflected, seeing other people reflected, and hopefully finding a sense of understanding through that, and being able to peek into these worlds that we all live in and that are just as important as the one that we are told is the most important. So that, and also hacking is really cool. I can't. I really wish I could. I mean, I do hope that people just look at it and think it's an awesome mystery book as well, and that it's creepy, and that you should never trust a place with Arkham in the name. And yeah, I mean, honestly, anyone who doesn't even think that at this point is probably beyond saving anyway. But it's still it in this case, and also because the story is so incredibly personal to me, it just boils down to there's nothing wrong with being disabled. There's a really cool community behind it, and I am one of many working on this, not just this book, but on disability representation. There are very many people who are doing a far better job at it than I am, and I'm just lucky to stand in their shadows and be able to be that part of the same community. But we're here and we see you, and you are so valid.
Yeah, and I
also,
would just
one small thing: queer disabled people exist, and please pay attention to the people making out in one wheelchair in one of the panels.
yeah, I would just echo a lot of that takeaway of, it's okay to be who you are, and to, have the courage to be who you are, and that you can do that in community. That, just as Jake in this book, that, it's with the support and encouragement of his friends that he's able to come to terms with who he is, and that, we're not alone, and that so much of that cultural shift has been as a result of reaching out to each other and supporting and encouraging each other. And also likewise that, it's a fun read, and one that people can enjoy, both as a text story and then also as a picture story.
Excellent. I'm so excited for both of these books once I'm able to actually get back to both reading and looking at stories. Because
I am so excited for yours. I am so excited for yours.
These are great so stories. Good. And the representation, the intersectionalities within the representation, I'm really happy that DC is providing one of the two largest comics platforms to be able to do this. Yeah. To put those messages out there, like both of you said, is that you are seen, if at least in these pages that are going to go out, like it's on the DC website. You're on the DC website, guys.
Hell yeah.
Like, you are seen. So again, thank you for joining us for this DC panel, and go out and buy the books, share them with friends, because they make great gifts. I'm just gonna say,
yeah. And like buy half a dozen at the time. Just like your friends definitely need, like, honestly, at least 5 of all of our books, probably more.
Yes. You need one for each room, for yourself, and then one for each room for your friends.
Yep.
I mean, it makes sense to me. Totally. So thank you, KidlitPride, for inviting us, and we will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.